Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be part of this initiative from the ICAC that is called Cotton Connects Videos. We wanted to talk to you today because we are trying to understand how COVID-19 is affecting the textile and apparel industry. And we would like to learn from you what are the main issues that synthetic fibers are currently facing. So welcome, bienvenida otra vez.
Thank you very much, Lorena. It's a pleasure and an honor to be invited to this presentation, to this interview. And just like all the fibers, synthetic fibers are having problems with the current lockdowns and measures to control COVID-19. But again, there are opportunities. And looking forward, I think we need to be positive, although current projections do suggest quite a drop in demand.
Okay, so let's go a little bit deeply into the subject. So as we all know, governments around the world have taken unprecedented measures to contain the spread of the virus. How are those measures affecting the supply and demand for synthetic fibers?
So I prepared a very brief presentation just to illustrate some of the points we're going to discuss. In this slide, what we can see is that apparel retail sales, the top two charts, both in China and the US, which are some of the largest markets for apparel, have been hit very hard by the coronavirus and the measures to contain the coronavirus. In China, unprecedented year-on-year declines in apparel retail sales, and in the US, as we can see on the chart on the top right, there was over a 50% decline in retail sales in March. And this is something that hasn't happened in any other recession as far back as records go for the US. The bottom chart illustrates the impact that transport has had on fibers, or better still, the sharp drops in production and sales of vehicles have an impact because there's about 30 kilograms of fiber in each average car, if there is such a thing. But there were huge declines year on year in March 2020 in sales. And this, as we know, so many auto producers just locked down through late February, March, and right into April for two reasons. One is the dislocation of the supply chain out of components in China, and then the lockdown restrictions in many markets. Many auto producers have now started, but we're going to see the impact on incomes and therefore reductions in supply, in sales of autos through 2020. But I wanted to just say that synthetic fibers have a presence in many, many applications, not just apparel. As we saw, auto, but then carpets have been affected, building, fiber reinforcement has been affected, sports equipment, things like tents, ropes, sport shoes, and then all the tourist industry and demand for fiber out of the tourist industry. However, as we're well aware from all the demand for face masks, demand for personal protective equipment, synthetic fibers into the hygiene sector is holding up very well. So anything else, Lorena?
Yeah, thank you for that interesting explanation that you just gave us. I do have a question. With the lockdowns implemented by different governments and countries, we've seen, as you said, a huge reduction of the demand for textile fibers. I know you've been working on some estimates, and we would like to know a little bit more. What is it that you are envisioning? What is the forecast that you have for 2020 and 2021 for different markets?
Okay. So from a supply side, the lockdown and the coronavirus has had an impact on production of synthetic fibers. And because synthetic fibers are produced in an industrial setting compared with an agricultural setting and a seasonal production cycle for cotton, Some countries actually completely stopped the production of synthetic fibers. Other countries, we had a reduction for about a month of 20 to 70%, sorry, 50 to 70% in production. So China, however, we've seen them sustain their operating rates quite well. Inventories have gone up, but not extraordinarily. And through to April, we think that the larger, more efficient part of the Chinese polyester industry was operating at between 70 to 80%. But India, for example, had a complete lockdown for nearly a month. They're starting now. And India is the second largest producer. Indonesia, and we think that in Southeast Asia, probably less than 30% of operating capacity was working during March and in April. In the US, we also saw a big reduction, estimates of under 60% operating rates. That should start to pick up again, but what that means is we probably lost at least a month of production. Some of that will be made up from stocks, but the polyester industry as fiber doesn't hold big levels of stock. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Lorena.
Yes, sure.
We have been working on modeling the coronavirus and the impact on all fiber demand and then on synthetic fibers. So initially, at the start of the first quarter of 2020, we estimated, based on a GDP model that we have, about a 5% drop in total fiber demand. This compared with our last estimate in 2019 of a 2% rise in 2020. So that gives you, broad maths, a 7% decline over our previous 2020 estimate. But for polyester in particular, we see a slightly smaller decline, anything from 3 to 3.5%, just because polyester is so competitive both on a price position, and this is going to be very important as the year moves forward and apparel recovers and discounting starts to take place across many brands and retailers. But also because it is in so many applications and it lends itself to a huge volume of development into the hygiene industry. One of the issues that the industry is now facing, this is the textile industry, is the huge volume of disposable hygiene products that are being worn once and thrown, both in the home with face masks and in hospitals and in care homes. So what's been happening with a little bit of development is coveralls, not surgical level coveralls, but coveralls for wards and for care homes are being made, rather than disposable one-off, they're being made with polyester textile filament with a coating, a polyethylene coating, for example, and that will take a whole number of washes, probably 30 to 40 washes, before you need to dispose of them. Now, moving forward to last month, to the end of April, our company with Mackenzie produced another global GDP forecast, which showed a much deeper decline in economic activity for 2020. And that would point, for example, to an 8% drop year on year in total fiber demand. We're hanging back a little bit on this because we believe that the lockdowns, the ease of the lockdowns are happening a lot more quickly than was expected. And economic activity, at least as it's being pointed out from China, is picking up much more quickly than we expected. Plus, the Chinese government has promised to support industry and encourage domestic consumption. And that really is going to have a big impact on demand for textiles and apparel into the second half of the year.
Excellent.
But it's probably our worst case scenario.
Thank you, Bruna. Let's talk a little bit about prices now. I know everyone have seen the prices of oil. It has dropped significantly in the past few months, and it is expected to remain under pressure because of the lack of demand. How is this affecting the price of polyester, and what can we expect for that?
Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, Lorena, and what we see here is I've compared on the left-hand side the price of OPEC oil in absolute terms on the right-hand side, but that's fallen 72% since January. These are month averages.
Okay.
And yet polyester staple, and this is an Asia price for a spinning fiber, has only fallen by 22%. There are many reasons for this, but the most important reason is that oil is not the only component in the price of fibers. And this is allowing a little bit of margin for producers, but in addition, even if producers reduced prices further, they wouldn't stimulate demand.
Okay.
So there has been competition between producers for the little demand that is out there, but they have been able to grab back a little bit of margin, and there comes a point where it's not just the price of the raw materials. You have energy, you have huge costs being put in as you put in health and safety measures to be able to reopen under the COVID-19 restrictions, for example. Mm-hmm. You cannot have as many shifts. And so we don't see prices probably moving a lot further down than they are. In May, we've seen a little bit of a recovery, especially in polyester staple, which is going into face masks, which is going into some of the protective equipment. Mm-hmm. But yes, we don't see a bigger decline than this, or a much further decline than we're seeing now. And really the reason is it doesn't pay to chase prices down when the volumes aren't going to recover.
Very good. You mentioned in the beginning of our conversation a little bit about opportunities. Every crisis has its own opportunity. And I would like to ask you, what opportunities is it there for synthetic fibers? How do you see the market, and what is it that the industry is doing to take advantage of these opportunities?
Okay, at this specific point in time and going back to end of March and through April, I think the synthetic fiber industry has just turned itself into producing face masks, face mask inserts, and personal protective equipment. There has been, for example, the polypropylene industry, which is for the nonwovens, where the inserts for many of the surgical and the N95 face masks contain polypropylene and blended fibers. There's been purchases of equipment for the melt-blown nonwovens. And then, as I discussed on the coveralls, for the polyester industry, it has moved to creating a combination of a very tightly woven fabric with very little stretch, with a coating of polyethylene to prevent so much highly disposable products. And the synthetic fiber industry just continues both on the non-woven side and on the traditional wovens to combine with the downstream textile industry to just produce personal protective equipment. Now, these are small volumes for now, but we believe that this is going to provide an opportunity for, or that this demand at least will remain at a higher level than it was before for quite a significant period of time. And it will provide both the polypropylene industry and the polyester industry with an exit, plus the downstream guys. We've seen furniture manufacturers, we've seen apparel manufacturers turning to face mask production. And that will give them at least a hand until demand for their products returns.
What about challenges? Do you see any challenges for the industry that we can discuss and try to understand what is it that the industry should do to overcome those challenges?
I'm never one to tell the industry what it should do because they know better than I do. And they are there on the front line. But one of the big challenges is the excess of capacity. And just for the fiber producers who produce commodity and our product and are unable to switch towards the higher demand at the moment, how long will they be able to survive if demand for apparel, for home textiles, for bedding doesn't improve quickly? But the other one is that the whole supply chain of textiles has been dislocated by the lockdowns. So even assuming that we have a strong pick in demand for apparel now, we're now looking at collections going into late summer, autumn, winter. Yet it's very difficult to get all the accessories for those collections into places like Bangladesh and Vietnam, because freight routes have been reduced quite significantly, because the people who produce those accessories in Europe or in China or in South Korea are not yet producing. So the big challenge for the whole textile industry, and this is not just synthetics, is making sure that the supply chain gets back to work efficiently, but not necessarily in the same way as before.
Exactly. That's, I think, the best advice or the best picture of what we have now. Those are the questions that I have for you today. I don't know if you would like to add something else that I didn't ask you, but I think you think is relevant and important to mention.
I think what's really been significant for me in this event, which is the only way I can describe it, is that prices are low, they have fallen, but they haven't collapsed to the extent that one would think would happen. And really that is coming out of producers and the textile chain understanding that, you know, price isn't going to bring volume back. That to me has been what one of the most important things. Going forward, we're going to see a lot of discounting, but
yeah, we're already seeing that on the internet. Every brand is doing.
But at the fiber level, we haven't seen that collapse in price.
Well, Bruna, thanks again. Muchas gracias for taking time to be with us today. And I really appreciate all the help and all the support you've given us over the years.
No, thank you very much, Lorena, and it's my pleasure. Anytime.